Hello, YouTube listening audience. This is Antonin Feori, your host from the Crimson Pill radio program, and I'm happy to introduce the following guest, Mr. Jan Irvin, who I first heard as a featured guest on Alex Jones's program recently. I found Mr. Irvin's work, the subject of his research, he's an author and researcher, to be perfect to answer many of the requests that I've been receiving from the YouTube listening audience, as well as my listening audiences on both bbsradio.com as well as Republic Broadcasting Network. And those questions or those requests from listeners have been centered around the idea of, look, we know that there is a matrix, so to speak. We know that we are consistently lied to, or at the very least attempted to be manipulated by the corporations and their marketing schemes, the mass media, and in particular, members of our own elected leadership, not just of the United States, but governments around the world. And so many listeners have asked and requested for a segment that would be based on how do we decode the matrix, so to speak. In other words, how can we see through some of these gimmicks, some of these techniques that are employed through the course of communication from these corporations, from these leaders? How can we see through these tactics so that we can better understand what's really happening around us and to us as a result of some of these gimmicks and techniques? So I'm very, very pleased and thankful that Mr. Irvin had the opportunity in his schedule to join us for this, which is considered to be part one of our discussion. Hopefully he and I will connect again very soon to have a lengthier discussion. It will probably air on bbsradio.com, but certainly we'll upload it here to YouTube again as well. And that second discussion, the part two, if you will give us a chance to really get into a much more in-depth discussion about his research, about understanding the trivium and the quadrivium, understanding fallacies of communication, of rhetoric, and of grammar that lead to so many complicated problems and result in so many of the unfortunate things that we see happening in government and in society around us. So without further ado, let's join our interview with Mr. Jan Irvin, in which we'll make a bit of an introduction about his background as well. And folks, thanks again so much for listening to the Crimson Pill. I appreciate all of your support, the emails, the personal messages. The show wouldn't be possible without your ideas and with your feedback. So thanks again, and here, Mr. Jan Irvin. And ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to introduce our next guest, an individual that I heard as a featured guest on Alex Jones' show quite recently. His name is Mr. Yan Irvin, an author, researcher, and in my opinion, an original thinker, which is rare in our times. He's an author of at least two books, and I'm going to ask Mr. Irvin if he'll help make a more thorough introduction of himself. But just before we do bring him into the program, you can find his work at www.gnosticmedia.com. Describes us as helping to pull us outside of the box and into the heart of cognizance itself, where the word Gnostic in this sense pertains to knowledge, not necessarily the dogmatic Gnostic teachings. Gnostic, of course, as so many of the folks in the listening audience already know, has its origins in the word knowledge, gnosis, in other words, from the Greek, or to know. His topics of investigation include education in the 7 liberal arts, including or comprised of the Trivium and Quadrivium, which I think is one of the subjects we'll be largely focused on in today's interviews. Mr. Irvin, are you there?
I'm here. And by the way, I should just say real quick so that people can find it, Gnostic is spelled with a G, Gnostic media.com.
Absolutely. And I think once folks make their way there, and so many of the folks in our bbsradio.com listening audience keep multiple browsers open during the course of their listening to the shows, so I hope that they're already on their way to www.gnosticmedia.com. Mr. Irvin, welcome to the program. How are you, sir?
Good, thank you.
Good. Well, I had mentioned that you are an author of at least 2 books from what I've been able to ascertain.
Right, and working on a couple of other book projects right now as well.
Fantastic. Maybe we'll have a chance to kind of return and revisit to some of that through the course of our interview. I very much appreciate your availability on such short notice, but upon hearing your interview on the Alex Jones Show, I knew immediately that you are an ideal guest to bring to the program, because today's program really involves the process of awakening. And so I think the term is thrown around too loosely.
I think that's definitely so. In fact, I would say much of what people think is waking up out there is in fact a lot of mind control stuff, and so that's it's very important to bring a lot of that to light. The Fabian socialists have been very tricky in how they've manipulated the New Age movement.
I think you're quite right, and in fact, maybe you could sort of begin our discussion by talking a little bit about the Fabians. For some folks out there, they may not be familiar with the Fabian Society.
In fact, I haven't even studied a great deal on it. My business partner, Richard Andrew Grove, he's done a lot more research on it than I have. But I know they were tied in with the Theosophists and with Madame Blavatsky and with other groups, and they're basically trying to push a socialist world agenda over everybody through means of bringing down the major ancient religions, which are also systems of ancient mind control, and trying to impose their own, which basically subverts family values, subverts traditional religious values, and creates this individualistic, typically positive thinking, which is usually inaction, right? It's I know a lot of positive thinkers that refuse to take any action whatsoever when they see a wrong being done, and they'll say, "Oh, well, you just need to think positive, or somebody else will come and take care of it." This whole sort of mentality. These are all things that have been done by the Fabian socialist types, which includes people like Alice Bailey as well, and they had an impact on education and things like that as well. But that's really. See, I kind of consider in many aspects, not in all, and I'm certainly not trying to throw out all New Age beliefs just as a blanket dismissal, but certainly the New Age movement has been largely subverted by people who are less than genuine in their promotion of ideals and the things that are results of them. Just real quickly, about a year and a half ago, I had Dr. Barbara Ehrenreich on my show, who's the author of a book called Bright-Sided, how the relentless promotion of positive thinking has undermined America. And there's an old saying, I forget exactly how it goes. I'm going to try and reiterate it, but there's an old saying: if you have somebody negative, somebody who's not negative or positive, and somebody who thinks only positive in a race, who would win the race? Let me ask you. Just go ahead and answer that. See if you can answer it.
Well, I would begin by saying I don't think it's the person that only thinks positively.
Well, it's kind of a joke, but here's the funny thing is the negative person, he starts off the race, he's complaining about everything, doesn't stop to smell the flowers or whatever, the guy who's not positive or negative,
sure.
He's not being negative, he is stopping to smell the flowers along the way or whatever, he's having a good time. Well, basically the idea is that those two finish the line at the same time, but the positive thinker is so upset by the negative thinker that the positive thinker sits down to meditate to clear the negative energy before they start the race, and they never finish it.
Yeah.
So, this is something that we have to keep in mind, and Barbara Ehrenreich really makes this issue poignant in her book, which is why I had her on my show. And if you study the Kabbalah, you have to realize that it's all about balance. You have a balanced diet, you want to have a balanced life, a balanced what do I want to say? Mental capacity, right?
Mm-hmm.
Balance is good. When things are out of balance, they're off balance, and they typically crash or don't function properly. So we want to have balance. And that's really the key, is not being overly positive or overly negative. You don't want to be around somebody who mopes around all day long, can't accomplish anything, and has a pity party either. You want somebody who's able to take action, able to get things done and accomplish things.
Sure. It's some of the sort of thinking that might remind some of our listening audience of
from
Buddhism, the middle way. The path of balance.
Yeah, exactly.
Understanding that the world is not inherently good nor inherently evil.
Exactly, that's exactly right. And there's Shiva and Vishnu, the creation and death. There's try and live without killing something, right?
Yes.
Whether it's a plant or an animal, I mean, some people claim that they can live off just the sun's energy or something, but I don't know if that's true or not. I haven't seen personal evidence of it myself. I'm not saying it's not possible, and certainly a lot of people promote that idea, but pretty much if you're alive, you're eating something, and therefore you're killing something to stay alive, and that's how it goes.
Quite right. Well, Mr.
And when we, sorry, I was just going to say, let me add
Sure.
that, and when we accept that fact, that's really where peace comes in.
Yes. And I think so many folks today, once again, the term awakening is used too loosely, in my opinion, and yet I think it is fair to say that so many folks on a daily basis now are becoming acutely aware of what is happening, the man's inhumanity to man, the horrific decision-making that seems to be driven by greed and lust for power. In that process of folks trying to sort out what is really happening in this world, some folks refer to it as the matrix or the mind control grid or the programming grid that's being imposed by some folks. Some folks use the term the elites or the powered elite or the New World Order. Without trying to get caught up in all of those terms, Mr. Irvin, what I would like to do is talk about your research and your work and some of the information or the steps that you point to in terms of helping people begin to see, to realize how pervasive some of these control mechanisms are around us in society, in culture, some of that programming that is maybe keeping us from being more aware of what is happening. And I think that some of that work, you would point toward the Trivium and Quadrivium as being essential in that regard. But I wonder if you'd respond or comment along these lines.
Well, sure. I think the Trivium and Quadrivium are absolutely essential in people's waking up. If we go back to Roman times, the Romans did not allow slaves to study the Trivium and Quadrivium. What the Trivium and Quadrivium are is what is commonly known as the 7 liberal arts. And these are called the 7 liberal arts, and the word liberal is a very interesting word. Today it has many negative connotations against it, like communist, anti-freedom, tax and spend liberals, all of this type of thing, Democrats. But these are all things that are actually the antithesis of what a liberal really is. A liberal, by definition, is somebody a liberal is the definition is of or befitting the free, and where the word comes from is the Latin word liber, which is where we get the word book from. And so there's been an intentional effort to actually twist the meaning of the word liberal around to make it into its antithesis. When you hear all of this rhetoric against liberals in the mainstream corporate media, the last thing you want to do is go study a liberal arts education and find out what that's all about. Mm-hmm. So when you discover that freedom is actually synonymous with book and libraries and things like that, then all of a sudden things start to click into place. And so the 7 liberal arts is composed of the Trivium and Quadrivium. The Trivium is grammar, logic, and rhetoric, specifically in that order. And the Quadrivium is math, geometry, music, and astronomy, specifically in that order. And when they're taught in that order, they bring about a systematic method of learning and understanding the world that we live in via the information coming in through the 5 senses. And there's evidence to suggest an intentional effort to take the Trivium and Quadrivium away from the masses via their education since about the 1850s. The way that the current marketing systems, public relations systems, government, and politics and law and all of these things, the way that they're set up now, if people had the Trivium and Quadrivium on a mass scale today,